Hello everyone, it's Jamal Thomas. Welcome to the Progressive Soapbox. Let me check my sound. I'm wide awake, and like all husbands whose wives are asleep and they're wide awake, they do the news, because real men do the news. Alright, I've been hitting this serious story hard. And this serious story has been hitting my wallet hard. Take a look at this. YouTube is infuriating. I think I said before, I am apoplectic. This day, man, it's a demoralizing thing to lose your it's a demoralizing thing to lose your live streaming capability. It feels weird. It's this monolithic, esoteric thing that makes a judgment somewhere and fucks you over. Beyond that, take a look at something else. I went to look at my account today and I see this. I'm getting to the story, but I'm thinking about this now, so. Not suitable, not suitable, not suitable, not suitable. Copyright. Not suitable, 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 not suitable. Oh, I got one. Not suitable. Not suitable. And look at some of the stuff they're considering not suitable. This is what's so aggravating about YouTube. Jeremy Corbyn demands UK military strike decision not be met. Well, that has nothing to do with... That's literally saying... the title demand says it all. Jeremy Corbyn addresses Syria in short interview, rationally clear Prime Minister in waiting. Again, nothing dramatic. Jeremy Corbyn is the opposition leader in Britain. What's so fantastic about that demands a strike, or that demands that not to be approved for advertisers? Breaking: U.S. illegally attacks limited targets in Syria. Even that's a news story. Like, that's what gets me about this. I am recounting a news story. Literally recounting a news story. Same thing. Believe it or not, this one was also struck. The Alex Jones one. They just approved this one today. But that means that everything up until that point, I didn't get credit for. YouTube is aggravating, man. And then for later on to be like, oh yeah, we approved this video. But 2,000 views have gone by that I've got no credit. I'm bitching at this point. I'm know it. Russia and Iran warn of consequences. Illegal strike. Syria issues. Again, a war thing they don't like. Russia releases chemical weapons. Again, war thing they don't like. And mind you, they will probably approve those. But we're almost 2,000 videos in, and they haven't come to some conclusion yet. Trump supporter is war with Syria making America great again. That's for some reason. Bombshell, Moscow Swiss lab and Skirple, they don't like that. Escape your point of view and political estimates. It's worse than you thought. Let's imagine greater. Even that's not about war. That's not about anything. Not to be rambling on for 29 minutes. Now, I understand. Me rambling on for 23 minutes is problematic. Fair enough. But does that really demand them not demonetizing that? Bombshell doesn't like that. Jeremy Corbyn calls for War Powers Act. Doesn't like that. Essentially a call to prevent war. Gets a strike. All right. United States must also immediately bomb Israel. All right, that one's just funny. OPCW Swiss lab not denying be some toxins. Doesn't like that. Syrian air defense responded to missile. That is just news. That is literally, this is what is taking place at this moment. And they're like, we don't like you talking about what's taking place in this moment. This is aggravating, man. It's aggravating. That's all. It's. I think for me, it feels like this thing that's outside of me is fucking with me. That's what it feels like. Like It's this thing I can't touch. It's this thing you can't communicate with, can't talk to, can't do anything with. This nameless, faceless thing that you've done nothing wrong, and yet they're fucking with you. And even when they realize, oh, it's our fuck up, there's no consequence. The other channels don't like to form unions, don't like to come together. They haven't even thought about forming a union or whatever else. And so each person is atomized. They're individuals dealing with a multinational corporation as opposed to grouping ourselves together into be something larger than what we are. It's aggravating. It's fucking aggravating. That still doesn't stop me from doing these stories, because I find these stories to be important. It doesn't make it any less fucking aggravating. So I did the story last time showing, it's like now that's off my chest. I did the story last time, I think the previous story, asking the question of whether or not this has been a false flag. And I gave this perspective of, when you look at the larger context of history in regards to some of the things that countries have done in order to effect their will, false flag wouldn't necessarily be beyond the pale. In fact, it would be somewhat of a normal course for a country's affairs. Turkey recently, Erdogan, gets caught on an audio saying that Turkey wants to do something. They wants to take some type of military action in Syria. One of the guys who's having the conversation says, look, don't worry about figuring out how we can do it. We can always come up with a way to justify the experience or justify how we do it. We can always just say it's Al-Qaeda, and that would give us a framework with which to work. Meaning, we just need to come up with a pretext with which to work. Then they take the extra step of saying reasons can be created to make this happen. He's talking about a false flag. We can come up with a false premise in order to make this work, to take military action in Syria. Now, when news of this gets out, Erdogan flips out. And not just flips out, consciousness of his own guilt. He shuts down YouTube in his country so the people in the country can't see it. I shit you not. Shuts down YouTube in the country and gets on saying, they're saying that we're doing something. We're trying to just protect this country. You're talking about a goddamn false flag. What are you talking about? Now, I say that to say that this is not necessarily beyond the pale for countries to do this. So it doesn't blow my mind if this turns out to be true. That was RT. There's been an independent observer that has come to the same conclusion. A UK journalist, Robert Fisk, goes to Syria. And at a certain point, he goes to the areas that were supposed to be bombed out, and he walks and he just talks. He talks to people. He just runs into people and talks to. One of the doctors that was in the video, he has the opportunity to talk to that particular doctor. The doctor tells him, the video is genuine. What you're seeing in the video is genuine. With one exception. It was gas inhalation. It wasn't chemical weapons. Now, as he stumbles, as he goes through the town, he talks to other people in the town. Other people in the town are like, what do you mean chemical weapons? There were chemical weapons? That's news to me. And he finds himself, he talks to one of the Syrian guards. This is part, I'm going to read the article itself, but the part is funny. And it took me a moment to realize that the guy was being glib. This is why I love humanity, man. I love fucking human beings. We can do really horrible things, but there are ways about us that transcend nationality, that transcends race, color, all those things. That it just becomes human beings. And it's a beautiful aspect of us that's, I think it's funny, and I'll tell you what I mean. One of the Syrian guards asks him, do you want to see some of the tunnels? And he says, yeah, sure. So he's crawling through the tunnels, he's going through the tunnels, and he's saying, the Syrian guard, they're going like a mile, deep. And the Syrian guard says, this tunnel is so deep it probably can go all the way to Britain. Now, it took me a while to get that. And then I was like, oh. He's trying to say that you're looking for chemical weapons and maybe your search needs to end up somewhere closer to home. Let's take a look at the article. I found the article interesting. And by the way, it doesn't necessarily mean as a flat fact that it was a false flag. Fisk doesn't know. But it does somewhat raise questions about the story when he's wandering through the city and he's having a hard time finding anybody who who's come across the gas attack. Especially when he's talking to the doctor himself, and the doctor himself is saying, no. The person was having difficult breathing because there was a bomb, not because there was gas. They were pouring water over his face and everything else, not because it was a chemical attack, but because the bomb that went off had a difficult time breathing and whatnot. It's like they used the video to get something across that wasn't true, even though the video itself was authentic, if that makes sense. It wasn't chemical. It was you get my point. Let's take a look at the video. It's not a video, but the article itself. The search for the truth in the rubble of Douma, and one doctor doubts over the chemical attack. Exclusive. Robert Fisk visits Syria clinic at the center of the global crisis. This is the story of a town called Douma, a ravaged, stinking place of smashed apartment blocks, and an underground clinic whose images of suffering allowed for the Western world's most powerful nations to bomb Syria last week. That, I don't like, this is me being, okay, this is a pet peeve. An underground clinic whose images of suffering allowed 3 of the world's most Western nations bomb Syria last week. That's not what allowed it, man. That's not what allowed it. The populations of those countries allowed it. That might have created a certain amount of pretext, but those Western nations, they wanted to bomb. The pretext itself. I guess I'm making a point that I'll skip it. I'm being picky. Ignore that. I don't like the word allowed because it makes it feel like it was pretext. They used pretext. Let's be honest. But these countries were still under legal strictures. The United States Constitution does not allow the President of the United States to just willy-nilly bomb whenever the President wants to willy-nilly bomb. That's why I don't like the word allowed. The Constitution restricts the President. The President is not a king. The President cannot go gallivanting around the globe just because the President wants to. Now, Congress has abdicated its responsibility to make sure the President doesn't do that. And we, at some degree, have abdicated our responsibility for putting pressure on Congress. The President is not a king. The President still control and strictures and everything else. It's one thing if he ignores it. It's another thing if Congress allows him to ignore it. It's Congress that allowed the President to bomb those places. Not so much what took place in Syria. That's what I'm making the point. Regardless of what took place in Syria, the President was still under law not to do that. He did it anyway. Just like he did it last time and there was no consequence. There's even a friendly doctor in a green coat who, when I tracked him down the very same clinic, cheerfully tells me that the gas videotape, which horrified the world, despite all the doubters, is perfectly genuine. War stories, however, have a habit of growing darker. For the same 58-year-old senior Syrian doctor, that adds something profoundly uncomfortable. The patients, he says, were overcome not by gas, but by oxygen starvation in the rubbish-filled tunnels and basements in which they lived on the night of the windy and heavy shelling that stirred up a dust storm. Dr. Asim Rabini announces this extraordinary conclusion. It is worth observing that he is, by his own admission, not an eyewitness himself, and, as he speaks good English, he references twice to the jihadi gunmen of the Jaish el-Islam in Douma as terrorists, the regime's word for the enemies, and the term used by many across Syria. Am I hearing it right? Which version of events are we to believe? By bad luck, too, the doctors, and this is me, I'm wrong. I thought it was the same doctor that was in the thing. That was me. I misspoke. In fact, I might have misread that part. But he is in Syria, and he is talking to the people in Syria himself. And he is walking around Douma, talking to people in Douma, and asking them, were you around for the chemical strike? What do you think about the chemical strike? And these people are like, what chemical strike? By bad luck, too, the doctors who were on duty that night of April 7th were all in Damascus giving evidence to the chemical weapons inquiry, which will be attempting to provide a definitive answer to that question in the coming weeks. France, meanwhile, said it has proof chemical weapons were used, and the United States media has quoted sources saying urine and blood tests show that too. The World Health Organization has said its partners on the ground treated 500 patients exhibiting signs and symptoms of consistent with exposure to chemical weapons. At the same time, inspectors from the Organization of Prohibition of Chemical Weapons are currently blocked from coming here to the site of the allegedly gas attack themselves, ostensibly because they lack the correct UN permits. That's kind of odd, right? I mean, the independent observers who are supposed to come there to do the test and analysis are not allowed to come there to do the test and analysis. Slightly weird. Slightly weird. Let's keep going. Before we go further, readers should be aware that this is not the only story in Douma. There are many people that I talked to amid the ruins of the town who said that they never believed in the gas stories, which were usually put about, they claimed, by the armed Islamist group. These particular jihadis survived under the blizzard of shell fire by living in other people's homes in the vast wide tunnels of the underground roads carved through the living rock by prisoners with pickaxes on 3 levels beneath the town. I walked through 3 of them yesterday, vast corridors of living rock which still contain Russian rockets and burned out cars. So the story of Douma is thus not just a story of gas or no gas, as the case may be. It's about tens of thousands of people who did not opt for the evacuation from Douma on buses that left last week, alongside the gunmen with whom had to live like troglodytes for months in order to survive. I walked across the town quite freely yesterday without soldier, policeman, or minder to haunt my footsteps, just 2 Syrian friends, a cameraman, and a notebook. I sometimes had to clamber across 20-foot-high ramparts, up and down almost sheer walls of earth. Happy to see foreigners among them, happier still that the siege is finally over. They are mostly smiling, those whose faces you can see, of course, because a surprising number of Douma women wear full-length black hijabs. I first drove in the Douma as part of the escort convoy of journalists, but once a boring general had announced that outside the wrecked council house, I have no information, that most helpful rubbish dump of Arab officialdom, I just walked away. Several other reporters, mostly Syrian, did the same. Even a group of Russian journalists, all in military attire, drifted off. It was a short walk to Dr. Rabini. From the door of his subterranean clinic, Point 200 it is called, in the weird geology of this particular underground city, is a corridor leading downhill where he showed me his lowly hospital and a few beds where a small girl was crying as a nurse treated her for a cut above her eye. I was with family in the basement of my home, 300 meters from here on the night, but all doctors know what happened. There was a lot of shelling by government forces, and aircraft were all over the place. Sorry, it's hard to read this. Aircraft were always over Douma at night. But on this night, there was wind and huge dust clouds began to come into the basement, wind and cellars where people lived. People began to arrive here suffering from hypoxia, oxygen loss. Then someone at the door, the white helmet, shouted, "Gas!" And a panic began. People started throwing water over each other. Yes, the video was filmed here. It was genuine. But what you see are people suffering from hypoxia, not gas poisoning. Oddly, after chatting to more than 20 people, I couldn't find one who showed the slightest interest in Douma's role in bringing the Western air attacks. 2 actually told me they didn't know the connection. So get what he's saying. He's saying, look, I might not have been directly here at this particular moment, but all of the doctors know what happened. Essentially, he's there. He's interviewing people who are there. The doctor said, what you're saying in the video is real, but your context is off. It wasn't because they were gas or chemical attacks. It was because they were suffering from hypoxia. They had difficulty breathing. And he's saying somebody, a white helmet, came running into the door and shouted, "Gas!" Now, I understand that in the West, that these guys are elevated to this role of, these are saints and he's got awards and everything else. I'm somewhat skeptical of this. So the white helmets were essentially paid for by Brits. And because I'm stuck with this knowledge that Britain has been paying terrorists to undermine the government, I'm also stuck with this knowledge that the white helmets may also be some kind of something that they're not necessarily are. So I'm not necessarily shocked by a white helmet come running in screaming gas. And at that point, everyone reacts to the gas. And then there's a videotape. Just so happens somebody there to take the videotape of people dousing water and everything else, and that water just so happens, or that tape just so happens to get back to the West, that they can run it over and over and over and over and over again as a loop, and people can scream dead babies into every microphone that they can find, and they can point to Bashar al-Assad. And the moment that somebody screams dead babies, the other person who tries to be rational and say, well, wait a minute, wait till let's get evidence. You don't want to do anything about the dead babies? It's not that I don't want to do anything about the dead babies. I want to make sure that what we do is measured and that what is taking place is what you believe is taking place. You're a Putin puppet and you're trying to help a goddamn dictator and he's killing babies and you're trying to help him kill babies. I don't think that's what dead babies. Dead babies. If you scream dead babies enough, it kind of makes it difficult for anybody else to get a word in edgewise because the only thing people really hear is dead babies. The question is, though, is it what you believe it is? You've seen a video. How do you know that that's a chemical attack as opposed to hypoxia? How do you know? The fact is you don't. Everything that you know, you're taking somebody else's word for it. This is somebody who went there and said, I walked around, I talked to the people who were there. The people who were there are telling me this. The OPCW is going to be doing an investigation. We await their results. But this is one journalist who's talking to people. He's there. He's talking to the doctors that were in the area, or at the very least that were there. And he says, all of us know what happened. All of us, I would imagine, talk. And this is what took place. You read the story for yourself. I'll put it at the bottom. British journalist. What's the journalist's name again? Robert Fisk. Robert Fisk in Douma, Syria. He's there. He went himself. He went to talk to the people there himself. So, the false flag. That's Russia's convention. And you have a journalist who went behind it saying, maybe. Maybe. This is not him being definitive. In fact, he's said himself in the article, the OPCW is doing an investigation and they'll come back with their findings. But up until this point, he is unable to find anybody who's found a chemical attack. Questions? We have questions. So, I will leave it at that. I'm still wide awake, so I'm probably going to have another story or two that I'm going to do tonight. So, I will leave it here. If you guys enjoy the content, please feel free to share, like, subscribe, and of course, you guys can always support through Patreon. Let me see. Is there anybody here? There are people here. Have you seen this Eva Bartlett video? She tells the white helmets. I have seen Eva Bartlett talk about the white helmets. So, look, I tend to be ambiguous about this stuff. Meaning, I tend to take it as I assume that I don't necessarily know. And I assume that this stuff is just kind of float in. It could be one way or the other, and I lean towards society with the evidence. The fact that a British organization essentially paid for the white helmets, that in and of itself doesn't necessarily make them bad, but at the same token, Britain has been trying to take down the government, so it doesn't necessarily add any credibility to them either. The fact that a white helmet came in and screamed chemical attack, and the guy can't find any chemical attacks, makes it look a little bad. Makes it look a little rough. That being said, we'll see what happens. I mean, the OPCW is supposed to be doing an investigation. But again, I have to be honest, I'm extraordinarily skeptical of the Western story. Whether a chemical attack is taking place or not is kind of besides the point. And I know this sounds bad, and I know this sounds harsh, but I don't mean it from the standpoint of harshness from a human element. I mean it's purely from the political space. It does not make sense for Assad to do this. That's all I mean by this. But we'll wait for the OPCW findings, and we'll see. We'll find out. So, I will leave it at this. Alright guys, you all have a good night. Thanks all.